The dominant function is kind of like the opposite to the tonic function. Rather than creating a relaxed feeling, it creates a very tense feeling. And both the 5 and the 7 chords function as dominant chords. So let's take a look at both of these in a progression. So here we have a 1 chord that we start with, a 1 major chord in the key of C. So after that, let's add the 5 chord. And then let's play this. So you can hear that creates quite some tension. We cannot really leave it there. It feels a little bit open if we leave it like that. And in fact, this is sometimes used at the beginning of stories or movies. You hear it sometimes to sort of open up like the movie, to make it feel like a story is starting, and then they will sort of close that towards the end. It's kind of an interesting technique to let a 5 chord sort of linger like that. But that is the 5 chord, which is the G in this case, and then we have our 7 chord, which would be a diminished chord in a major scale because it's built upon that 7th scale degree. That sounds like this. Also has a lot of tension. Now, if we want to look at these both next to each other, here is our 5 chord, or here's our 7 chord, and here's our 5 chord. And you can see that again they have 2 notes in common, and they also both have this note, the B, and this note is an important one to know about. The B, in the case of, if we're talking about the C scale, the B is the leading tone. It's a half step below the root, and it has a very strong tendency to go back to that C, even if you use just this tone without using the chords. It feels like it should go somewhere, and where it wants to go is right there. And that's where you finally feel that resolution. So both of these chords have that. Now let's take a look at something else which is kind of interesting. If we go back to our 5 chord and we add so this is the 1st and the 3rd and then the 5th of our 5 chord. Let's make this into a dominant 7th chord. And a dominant 7th chord built upon the 5th scale degree is usually called a 5-7 chord. So whenever I mention a 5-7 chord, I mean a 5 chord that's being made into a dominant 7th chord. And in case you forgot to find the dominant 7th chord, what we do is we find the root of the chord, which is a G, and then we go down 2 half steps. So that would leave us with an F, and then we just transpose that up an octave. So the 5-7 chord in C has the notes G, B, D, and F. And I found this a little bit confusing when I was learning about this, because we're talking about the 5. Firstly, we're talking about the 5 chord, and in that case we mean the scale degree, which is the G in this case. But then we're talking about the 7, and in that case we talk about the 7th chord, so not the scale degree. So a 5-7 chord means a dominant 7th chord built upon the 5th scale degree. I just want to say that a few times so that it's not raising any confusion. But the interesting thing with this chord is that if we take this note, the G, and we remove it, what does this look like? Well, this is actually just that regular 7 chord. It's a B diminished chord. So that 7th chord is already inside this dominant chord. So basically this chord is 2 chords in one. It's that 7 chord and it's that 5 chord. And both of them have the dominant functions. So this one is gonna be the most dominant of all, I guess. And really, I feel very restless if we don't resolve that. So let's resolve that. Now there are some other very interesting things about this chord, but we're going to talk about those more in the examples, and also next when we're going to talk about the predominant or subdominant function.